Seems a bit of a random choice reviewing this game, doesn't it, given all the other games that are currently dropping over these several months? But I can assure you, there is a good reason why I'm dedicating a video on Gargoyles Remastered. My girlfriend really wanted me to do it. Okay, so a bit of quick background. When my other half and I first got together, one of the first things she did was introduce me to her favourite childhood show, which was Gargoyles. And I'll admit, I'd scarcely even heard of this show before then. It was broadcast during the mid-90s before my time, and was mostly popular in America, and mostly on the more Disney-oriented channels, which my family didn't exactly have back then. But since she started showing me this, I couldn't help but become fairly fascinated by the show and its premise. For background, the story follows an ancient clan of gargoyles from medieval Scotland, led by Goliath, who'd glide the lands by night and sleep in stone by day, and were guardians of the Celts they shared a castle with. But following a sudden betrayal, his whole clan got cursed into taking a quick nap for 1,000 years, until they were reawakened in 1990s New York City, with their castle now lifted on top of a skyscraper owned by millionaire eccentric David Xanatos, who I can only imagine was trying to compensate with that stunt. Also obligatory David and Goliath reference. I'll just go ahead and give my quick thoughts on the actual show. The main voice cast of the show was immaculate, going all the way to star Keith David, Jonathan Frakes, Ed Asner, and even John Rhys-Davies, and not forgetting our boy Clancy Brown. I loved exploring the complex emotions and story of Goliath, and how he's trying to learn to trust the human world again after all he's been through. I love the rivalry between him and that smug rich bastard Xanatos, who had one of the rawest lines from a 90s kids show.
Pay a man enough, and he'll walk barefoot into hell.
There's a plethora of wonderfully good and dastardly side characters who appear every now and again, and it was interesting to see all the Shakespearean references that were woven in. But that's enough about the show. Let's talk about this game that spawned from it, because since I'm no stranger to a few properties that are either underrated or don't nearly get the love from their higher-ups that they deserve, why not add to that list with Gargoyles? So Gargoyles Remastered is, as the title suggests, a faithful remaster of the original Gargoyles game, based off of the series released on the SEGA Genesis back in 1995. The game follows Goliath through a multi-stage 2D side-scroller, blending platforming and combat with a fancy boss at the end of each of 5 whole stages. The Remastered Edition brings the game onto all 9th gen consoles, Switch and PC, with a few new additions, including achievements, a lovingly updated soundtrack and faithful cartoon graphics, and the wonderful ability to switch between old and new graphics and soundtrack. Similar to Halo MCC, I wasn't sure what to expect other than what I described thus far, so I streamed the game over on Twitch to find out how it was. And oh boy. Oh god, what I foolishly did not expect was a small platformer that begrudgingly held on to all of the jank and questionable handling that plagued many 90s games to come back and bite me in full force. But this is a remaster, right? Surely the devs will have refined the gameplay for more modern standards of platforming and difficulty in the modern age now that they've had a good dive into updating the rest of the game. Right? Right?
Oh, Jalapeno, how naive you are, my sweet summer child.
I'll just preface now that most of my frustration stemmed from my first initial jump into the game, but if you don't have experience with deliberately hard games or retro games that encourage you to spend hours at a time trying to beat one single stage, it might be best for you to go back and play Minecraft Peaceful Mode in your mum's house, because almost every fault of early video game control from the 90s is transported over into this remaster and is back with a vengeance. And I mean more than just a boss that you can beat entirely with a button mashing contest. There are enemies that can get you into a stun lock for ages and eat away at your health, bars that you have to swing on that don't always register you grabbing onto them, some of which being over instant death bottomless pits, jumps and punches that themselves don't always register, and environmental hazards that give you little to no time for reaction whatsoever. One of the other new features added was a rewind feature, not unlike that from the Forza games, where you can rewind the game a few seconds back to restore some health and attempt to part again, and even cheat death in some parts. Its very existence goes on to tell me that they did this on purpose. It seems they were well aware of the problems at large, yet didn't bother to so much as touch on the old control. That all the higher-ups were so focused on the aesthetic updates, and didn't give the developers the opportunity to improve upon the control, or time to remake what is a relatively small game in a newer, more functioning engine, which sadly wouldn't surprise me today. Especially since there were a few other things I noticed were mysteriously absent from the remastered look, which, switching back and forth from old and new looks, I could pick out on. Goliath didn't seem to have any ambient noises or growls in the newer version, at least when I first played it. One of the power-ups lost its special music, enemies seemed to lack most of their hit sounds or had them turned down very, very quiet, which made it difficult to discern whether I was actually damaging them or not, and the hue in some of the fiery stages was a little bit much on the eyes. There was even a visual bug where one of the floating platforms turned invisible, and I didn't even realize it had reset until I incidentally managed to climb on top of it. And yet, in spite of all of the struggle, all of the frustration, I stubbornly pressed on. The final phase of the last boss eventually boiled down to a fast-moving target zipping and zapping all over the screen that would deal damage if you so much as touched it without landing the perfect hit. And it was made all the more harder by having to constantly shift from platform to walls that were constantly setting on fire and virtually stun-locking you there, making it laborious to hit this target who would zip through the air for less than a second. It might not sound too bad, but this was coupled with one more feature of the original game that hadn't been changed. Depending on which difficulty you choose, you get a limited number of lives which decreases each time you die. If you lose all of them one time, you go back to the start of the stage you were on, but if you lose all of them a second time, you get sent straight back to the main menu like a child being sent to the naughty step for being a failure. And since there's no autosave in this game, if you haven't thought to manually save your progress, you are forced to go all the way back to the very start of the game and begin the entire arduous process from scratch. And if you have saved your progress, then I hope you still have plenty of lives and hit points stored, because I ended up on my last legs on the final stage, barely a few hit points from game over, and had to deal with that for pretty much the entire final fight. But a gargoyle does not whine, he roars. And despite all that, after 5 arduous hours, almost half of which was spent on the final level alone, I pulled through. My final hit landed on the final boss, and I beat the game. Through all the questionable platforming, the strenuous enemies and one-hit kill opponents along the journey, I had done it. And then I played it again and I suddenly beat it in less than half that original time. Perhaps my inner honorary 90s kid, through all that hard work and torment, had finally gotten the knack of all the physics and strategies and handling required to finally get the most out of this classic finicky video game, and finally tamed the raging beast that opposed me, like I'd figured out how to control an early 3D Sonic game. Or maybe it was because I actually started using the rewind feature a lot more. Do I recommend picking up Gargoyles the video game remastered? Well, only if you're aware of what you're in for and have just enough patience to keep Gary Barlow happy for a generation. It's like Kadikarus says, a game can expect mechanical perfection from me, but then I have to expect mechanical perfection from it.
Or if you much rather support the series Gargoyles in a different way, check out the show on Disney Plus, or look for 3 different comics coming up on their online stores and comic book stores near you.
It's definitely not Rayman 1 levels of difficulty, since this game is actually far more beatable than that. And again, I was actually able to beat the game more than twice as fast on my second attempt while gathering footage for this video. So, if you did play the original, then you'll most likely enjoy getting to play this game again, with either the updated or the familiar old graphics, and gameplay you've either missed or is coming back to torment you, like moving into a retirement home with your old school bully.